Hey guys, what's going on? It's Filmington. In this video, we're going to talk about how you can leverage what people post to online forums to then deduce whether that hobby product that they're talking about is undervalued, overvalued, or properly valued. Now, you could do this by looking at the scope of just Twitter, of just a particular Facebook group. You could do this by looking at Blowout forums. That's going to be the standpoint for today's video. It's just a lot cleaner. You've got better organization of people's contributions, usually all under one thread for any notable product release. And how's this possible? It's because when people write something online about a product, whether they articulate it or not, it often takes into account not just demand, it also takes into account supply or perceived supply, what they know about that supply at any given time, and pricing. You know, it's sort of like writing a review for a steakhouse. Are you really going to give them a 5 out of 5 stars on Yelp if it wasn't a top 5 steak and you paid more than you paid for any other steak in your life? So you paid $95. It was good. It didn't wow you. Are you really going to give them a 5, or are you going to give them a review? Are you going to evaluate them relative to pricing along with some of their attributes, right? So demand, supply, pricing, whether it's in the person's comment or not, often it takes into account multiple of those, not just the demand side. So cardboard connection, website, great to understand, checklists and things like that. There actually is, for each hobby product, for each product, there's a 1 through 5 score. And sometimes you even get some reviews underneath, but sample size is really small. But this is something I've looked in the past. I'm like, well, is this product release really better than the last one? Because it's got a 1.8 and last year was 2.5. But it's not as reliable as looking at the indicator that we'll talk about in today's video, which is Blowout forums. So, ideally, you want to hear from and read posts from those that have actually opened the product. But that's not always feasible, nor do you always know that, right? Somebody might say something about a product, but maybe they didn't open any. Maybe they just watched some breaks. Maybe they just buy singles. Maybe they just heard something from somebody else, right? So you have to be careful. Not everybody's opinion is going to be as useful, but you're not going to know that. So you might as well just keep everybody's opinion weighted the same. So the methodology here is, ideally, you're going to start doing this indicator after the product's released or on release date. But sometimes you can learn quite a bit about a product from pack odds, which sometimes you get before release date, or when the checklist is released, which there's a risk there because the checklist could be wrong. Sometimes it's good for me to look at the data beforehand, just because I'm often making buying decisions really close to release date, so I want to get an idea. So it's still useful to look at it before release date, I think. You have to treat people's posts as binary. Okay, this person said these two positive things and this negative thing, but what was like the overall tone of their post? Was it positive, or was it negative, or was it neutral? The way the formula works is you take the positive posts and you divide it by the overall number of posts, positive and negative, and you throw out in the denominator, you don't include any of the neutral messages where somebody says, what's better, hobby or jumbo? The point is to include and count people that say, hey, the quality control sucks. Okay, that's a negative message. And the next person might say, I like the photography for this one specific card. So sometimes it's not, definitive or completely objective. Sometimes you have to interpret the tone yourself. So your score might be different than my score. And you have to make sure not to double count people. On Blowout forums, there are often people that comment multiple times on the same page, never mind the entire thread. So you have to be careful there. But looking at 22 Topps Chrome pre-release date, so all the way up through, I think it was October 27th, I counted 17 versus 9, or 17 divided by 26, right around 65% sentiment score. So that ends up being slightly above average. So let's get into the different sentiment scores. 0 to 25% positive would be very low, and that's obviously the worst. And that's an attribute of a product that often will fall in pricing after release date. Sometimes it'll get cut in half. So 22 Topps Chrome Baseball. Perfect example of this, right? Perfect example of this. You have to be careful, again, because a lot of people didn't realize that the checklist wasn't what they thought it was going to be. So looking back on it, you'd probably want to remove all the pre-Topps news or pre-release date messages from your calculation there. The next sentiment score is 26 to 50% positive, and that would be low. So here's where the product tends to fall, maybe somewhere between 50 to 30%, give or take. In the short term, kind of subsequent to release, it'll fall in pricing quite a bit. Maybe not significantly, maybe not as significant as a 22 Topps Chrome, but you're just getting kind of people that are just like meh. And low and very low, the two scores that we talked about, those are going to be the most common outcomes, especially these days. And some of this is because people tend to be a little bit negative. So that's something you have to be careful for. People tend to be more negative in group settings. People are also skeptical and cynical, a lot of people that post online. So that's part of the reason why you see a lot of low and very low sentiment scores. Topps, at the end of the day, they're in the business of making money too. So, if they're getting high and in very high, which are the next two sentiment scores all the time with all the releases, part of that is good because of the demand, but it also means that maybe their pricing is too low. They could be doing a better job maximizing profits. Another reason why we're seeing a lot of low and very low scores for sentiment is that, group breaking right at release, it's making the price points unbearable, very difficult for people to get into, unaffordable at the get-go, right? So it's been senseless in a lot of times for collectors to try to compete with that. So price can be a huge factor that can lead to that lower sentiment, at least right out of the gate. In that first 2 to 3 weeks, after release, distributors are holding it back, breakers are buying it all, driving up prices on it. You've got stores, shops, maybe even colluding on pricing, trying to keep like a minimum floor of those prices to make as much money as possible. And that can lead to people saying negative things. So the next sentiment score is 51 to 75% positive, and that's going to be high. We talked about 22 Topps update. This is when the price tends to stabilize in the short term, maybe around plus or minus 10% from the release date pricing. For the most part, collectors and people that are opening the product are happy with what they're getting. And again, this is something that's not as common as probably the very low or low, particularly in 2022. Now, the highest sentiment score is going to be very high, which is 76 to 100% positive. And this is where you see the product increase from release date pricing in the short term. There's a better chance that a very high or even a high sentiment score will lead to the product being a good long-term investment. In conclusion, this is not a perfect indicator, and the more data you have, the better, which means that the longer we're out from release date, the more informative this number is, I think. But it is a data point, and it does factor in demand, supply, pricing, and a lot of this comes from the collectors, the people that are opening the product. And this is ultimately how you're going to get higher long-term returns of sealed product if that product gets opened consistently over time. Now, in describing these different conclusions for each of the different sentiment scores, I talked about short-term valuations. Is this overvalued or undervalued in the short term? Is this properly valued in the short term? It's because in time things can change. Player performance, macroeconomic factors. This can all lead to data being stale about what people said. Maybe $200 was a good price back then, but now milk tripled in cost, and now it's actually kind of silly that I even said that. Or it could be quite the opposite. Back in 2017 through 2019, we saw a lot of low sentiment scores. You're seeing people talk about 2019 Topps Chrome getting skunked. And since then, that product has done really well, even with what's happened with Tatis. And it's because the price of the contents has increased. It's because we've seen inflation of singles prices across the board, which has corrected, but it's led to a lot of 2019 Topps Chrome being open. There's not a whole lot of it anymore. So very useful information. I've even gone and I've used Blowout forums for soccer. You're not going to see as many data points for some of the other sports I've noticed. You can chime in down below why. Is it because baseball has the most collectors? I don't know. There might be a reason for that. It can certainly help manage risk, when you're looking to open maybe a medium to large sized allocation in a certain product right after release date, when prices are most volatile for sealed stuff, it can certainly help to give you a little bit more information and make a decision. All right, guys, that's it. Let me know what you think down below. Does anybody here have experience with any sentiment indicators, any success that you've had with it that you'd like to share? Put it all down below. Thanks, guys. Like, comment, subscribe. Filmington out.